This conference will now be recorded.
All right, welcome to the 2023 TBERF RFP webinar and Q&A. Thanks for joining us. We are about halfway through the RFP period, so we wanted to hold this webinar to give you our insight into the TBERF program and answer any of your questions. Today, you should come away with a solid understanding of who is eligible for TBERF funding, what types of projects are likely to be funded, and how to submit a strong application. It's a lot of information to cover, so sorry if I move through it pretty quickly. I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Please stay on mute until the end. We'll do questions there via chat, or you can unmute yourself at that time. So let's get right into it. TBERF is a public-private partnership. It is co-managed by Tampa Bay Estuary Program, who I work for, and Restore America's Estuaries. Elsa Schwartz is here representing them today. And the partnership was built to pool funds from federal, state, regional, and local governments, private sector companies, individual donations and gifts, and environmental fines and penalties. This is the 11th year of the TBERF program, and so far nearly $8 million have been competitively awarded to support projects in the Tampa Bay watershed. Approximately $700,000 will be made available to support 2023 TBERF projects. So that's this year, this year's RFP. I'll be providing the majority of the info today, but as I mentioned, we have Elsa from Ray and Maya Burke is also from TBEP to provide additional clarity and help answer some questions as needed. All right, so today's agenda is short and sweet. I'll run through some background info and then get into the RFP details. I would like to have 20 to 30 minutes of questions for questions and answers at the end. So we'll try to get through this stuff quickly. All of the documents or publications referenced today can be found on the TBEP website. The 2023 TBERF RFP info is on this page too. Elsa's going to throw that link into the chat for your reference. And feel free to reference those materials as we move through it together. So it's important to note that this application process is a little bit different from previous years. First, the narrative proposal format has been replaced with a proposed scope of work. This is to encourage projects that have been well thought out and have a clear idea of actionable steps to move from concept to implementation. It'll also reduce administrative burden for both of us, for the TBERF applicants and managers. Secondly, the budget worksheet has been restructured to provide better guidance on how to allocate funds across project phases and improve accuracy and consistency for requested amounts. Finally, rather than submitting an application via email as we've done in the past, proposers are required to submit your application through an online Smartsheet portal. So most TBERF projects last for 2 to 3 years and fall into one of 4 major categories: on-the-ground habitat restoration or conceptual planning, water quality improvement projects such as construction of stormwater BMPs and green infrastructure, research and monitoring with a clear application for resource managers, or evidence-based social marketing campaigns to encourage pro-environmental behaviors within the community. Awards range anywhere from $25,000 to $250,000, although there is no official award floor or ceiling, so that's just a range. In the past, applied research projects have been funded at levels between $50,000 to $80,000, and restoration or construction projects have been funded between roughly $100,000 to $200,000. Because so many applied research projects have been funded in recent years, this year we're specifically encouraging on-the-ground habitat restoration and water quality improvement projects. So who can apply? Projects must be led by government entities, nonprofit organizations, or academic institutions. Although private consultants and individuals cannot apply to TBERF as a lead organization, they are encouraged to partner with eligible organizations as members of the project team. TBERF projects must provide a benefit to the Tampa Bay watershed, whether that be a positive impact or a direct benefit. This is a map of the watershed. Elsa has also thrown in the link to this map so you can see if a project that you're thinking of is within this range. So we just learned that the project should provide some sort of benefit or positive impact within the Tampa Bay watershed. That benefit or impact should be identified in one of these publications. Elsa's going to put some links in the chat to these. They're also on the website, as I mentioned, and they're also linked within the RFP details, which we'll look over later. I'll refer to these publications a few times, and I'll probably forget to say the whole title, so I'll probably say CCMP or HMPU. If anything is unclear, feel free to ask for clarification in the chat. We use TBRF to strategically advance various CCMP actions. I already did it, the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan actions. So each year, several focal areas are prioritized for project solicitation. This year, preference will be given to projects that restore creek ecosystems to support the comprehensive management goals of habitat protection, water quality improvement, and flood control. Restore non-coastal native upland habitats, especially pine flatwoods, to help meet 2030 targets adopted in the Habitat Master Plan. For pine flatwoods, it's 450 acres, in case you're curious. Implement green infrastructure techniques to manage stormwater and reduce nitrogen loading, especially in underserved and overburdened communities or in the old Tampa Bay watershed. Implement projects that address aging wastewater infrastructure issues and reduce reclaimed water contributions of nutrient loads to the Tampa Bay estuary. And last but not least, enhance science literacy on key bay issues, especially in underserved and overburdened communities. These are the priorities for 2023, but we do encourage applications for any eligible projects. These are just the focus points for this year. So moving on to evaluation criteria, your project approach is the most important piece of your proposal. It should show a really clear idea with activities linked to specific success metrics, and all of that spelled out really clearly. Beyond basic eligibility criteria, higher scoring projects will address one of the priorities that we just mentioned a moment ago. TBEP, Tampa Bay Estuary Program, has funded more than 30 years of research and projects. The best proposals should demonstrate familiarity with the relevant tools for the project, the research and projects previously supported by TBEP, and situate your work within that context. As well as other important priorities like building an open science ethos into all of your work projects, engaging the community, items like that. We will review an example scope of work later, so we're definitely going to come back to this again. So just to go over, I mentioned the open science principles. Our staff here, Marcus Beck, put together this really handy SOP. We can put that in the link as well, so you can check that out. Basic open science principles include data projects that are fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, that follow tidy data formats and include documented metadata, have transparent workflows, and are shared on a web repository, all of these things. There's that SOP that you can refer to. I definitely encourage you to check that out, especially if data collection is going to be part of your project. Second bullet here for evaluation criteria, level of effort and cost by phase. This is also really important. Do your project phases make sense? Is your budget free of errors and consistent with the scope of work? Is your proposal a good return on investment? There are a lot of tools out there to compare your project cost to industry standards. Some of our agencies like SwiftLend may have those, but I'm not sure if they're publicly available or not, or if they would be interested in sharing them. But we will review an example proposal budget later. I just want to bring this up now so you can see that it is worth 25 points within the evaluation criteria. Your project team should include experts who are capable of completing the proposed tasks. Projects should offer meaningful engagement with the community include representatives from those communities in an influencing and decision-making capacity on the project team. Those responsible for providing matching support and long-term operation or maintenance responsibilities for the project should also be included in the project team. Keep those things in mind as you're building out your team for this proposal. And last but not least, innovative solutions and partnerships. These are some other ways that you can set your project apart from other proposals. Develop an approach that extends beyond the life of the grant. Can others use your methods as a model? Can your work be easily replicated in the future and incorporated into baseline understanding of the Tampa Bay watershed? Does your project advance a cutting-edge approach for research, tackling an emerging issue, contaminants of concern, microplastics, PFAS as examples, or does it apply a novel technology? Does it help us reach beyond the typical choir and grow our partners, especially in those communities that are both underserved and overburdened? So keep those potential innovative solutions and partnerships in mind as well. This is the anticipated timeline for 2023 TBRF evaluation. Proposals are due March 15th at 5 p.m. Late April, the review team may reach out for additional information. This is really just for clarity. And then June, we're anticipating projects to be awarded, June 2023. Contracts are executed, projects begin summer, probably more like fall 2023. We will spend some time here going over how to apply. Remember that this is a new application process than in previous years. All materials are available at this link that Elsa has already put in the chat for you. We're going to go a little bit out of order from the application materials, just it might make more sense that way, and hopefully provide some helpful insight along the way. So this is the very first difference here. This is the web portal. You will be completing your applications, submitting them on the web portal. Partially completed applications cannot be saved in the web portal, so keep that in mind. You're going to compile all of the information and then submit it all at once, and you won't be able to edit it after that. Changes cannot be made to the application once they have been submitted. And you're going to use the application and budget justification worksheets to draft your proposals. We'll go into those details now. This is all the helpful stuff that's included in the application worksheet. We've got your instructions. You're definitely going to want to review that. There's detailed instructions for the budget justification worksheet as well. So we're going to go through some of these. I'm going to go a little out of order, like I said, and we're going to hit the scope of work first. This is the most important part of your application. This scope of work is your plan of attack for project implementation. What is the project? How will you accomplish it? How are you going to measure it? A template is in the application worksheet, and I'm going to show you a example, and we'll talk about that together. So let me know, is this readable to y'all? Do I need to make it any bigger?
I can see it.
We can see it.
Cool, thank you. So this is an example scope of work. This plan should include a budget. It should include a timeline. It should include deliverables. It should include measurable benefits for each phase of the project. All applications should include specific quantitative performance metrics that will be tracked and measured to evaluate the success of the project in achieving the stated conservation goals in your proposal. If a project proposal has more than one phase, like we see here in this example, measurable resource benefits or metrics for each phase must be clearly defined. You can see here we've got a measurable benefit for each of these example phases, all the way down to the third one here. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. How should you structure a phase? Think about when you'll need to be paid and whether or not you'll be able to demonstrate that a measurable benefit has been achieved. What is the flow of your project? For a restoration project, the first phase may be data collection, planning, permitting, community outreach. The second phase may be construction or installation, restoration implementation, like we see here in this example. The third phase may be monitoring or assessment, like we see here in this example. What would be the measurable benefit to the environment, to the resource, or to the community for each of these phases? And remember that these benefits should link to the issues outlined in the CCMP and the Habitat Master Plan that we talked about earlier. How will those benefits be measured? Each project phase summary should be fairly brief. It's just this information right here. Additional details can be provided here. We didn't put anything in this example description because it's pretty straightforward. How do your project phases flow over the 3-year timeline? Think about what the completion date for each phase and ultimately the project will be. For the completion date, you should assume roughly a start of fall 2023, and you can build out from there. TBRF is deliverable based, meaning payments occur when deliverables are provided by you and approved by your TBRF manager, which will likely be myself or Elsa. Payments will match the TBRF budget that you've outlined exactly. So once you finish this phase 1, for instance, these deliverables are provided and approved. You'll submit an invoice for this TBRF share, and that is the total that will be provided. It is a fixed cost. And deliverables should demonstrate the benefit provided in each phase. So the deliverables here will demonstrate how this measurable benefit has been met. Progress reports are going to be submitted each quarter until the project is completed. This example scope of work is in the folder for the meeting materials, so you'll be able to review it as you build your own proposal. So back to our presentation here. Benefits versus deliverables might be a little confusing. So let's talk about it a little bit. The measurable benefit. What is the benefit to the environment, to the resource, or the community? What metric will be used to measure success or impact of that benefit? Then the deliverable is what output will be used to demonstrate that the measurable benefit has been achieved. So the benefit is the actual thing that you're achieving. The deliverable essentially is the proof that that has occurred. These are some examples, and they're going to be obviously specific to your project. I'm happy to help work with you on this if it's unclear. An example of a measurable benefit is the number of acres of habitat restored. The deliverable is the as-built plans, the before and after photos, or an assessment report. Another example of a benefit is the number of stormwater BMPs installed. The deliverable for this would be as-built plans, before and after photos, for example. Another measurable benefit example is the number of public workshops held if you're doing any sort of community outreach or looking for community feedback. A deliverable would be a sign-in sheet, a feedback report, agendas from those meetings or presentations from those meetings. And last but not least, a number benefit could be data sets, tools, analysis, anything that could be published to an open science repository. The deliverable would be the source code or repository link for that benefit, showing that that has been completed. So that is a lot of information about the scope of work. Again, those examples are going to be provided to you so you can check them out moving forward. So the budget justification, the instructions are included in the application worksheet, and you also have this spreadsheet, the budget justification worksheet. It's another really key piece of your proposal. So you definitely want to read the instructions in the application worksheet thoroughly, complete the budget justification worksheet. And right now I'm going to show you that worksheet. Is that fairly readable to everyone?
Yes.
Yep.
Sweet. Awesome, thank you. This is your template for your budget justification. TBRF is fixed cost and deliverable based award. So what are the costs associated with implementing each phase of your project? What funding is required to get to the measurable benefit for each phase? TBRF payments will match the TBRF budget for each phase exactly. How much and what type of matching funds will be used for match? So how much, we've got different types here: cash, in-kind, unrecovered, direct, and land. The information here should also be consistent within your scope of work. Some things to look out for when you're completing the worksheet: most activities are contractual, not construction. That's going to be under the expense category here. Make sure that the numbers sum correctly, both for the phase and for the totals at the end, and that non-allowable expenses are not included. Non-allowable expenses might be out-of-state travel or conference travel. Those are all listed in the budget justification instructions. Make sure overhead expenses do not exceed 10% of the project. It should sum here, but again, make sure that your numbers are summing correctly. A common mistake is that items might not be organized by phase. See here how we've got 4 phases in this template. You can add more if needed or remove them if you don't need them. You will want to convert your spreadsheet to a PDF because that is going to be combined with your submission materials later. This is an example of a pretty good budget. Funding is laid out by phase. Activities are straightforward within each phase. The expense categories appear to be correct here. The totals sum correctly both for each phase at the end and down here at the bottom. There's sufficient match funding and the match types are included. So again, it is at least one-to-one match is required, and you can show match in a variety of ways. The completion dates here fall within the maximum timeline of 3 years for this example project. So this example completes in January of 2026. So this example good budget is included in the meeting materials. You can check it out later. Let's look at a not so good budget so we can figure out what not to do. So here we've got a few different issues. This is an incorrect category. This should be contractual, I believe. We've got no TBRF money for this phase. Overhead costs, excuse me, are not assigned to the phases. If you recall in this good budget example, it's under the overhead and admin is under each phase. The overhead here exceeds 10%, only 10% is allowed for TBRF proposals, and there is not at least a one. Sorry, just dying a little bit. I'll be fine. The total doesn't add up correctly. It exceeds the 3-year timeline. So there are a lot of issues here that you can check this out and make sure to avoid them as you build your proposal. So this is also in your application worksheet. It's a list of required documents. You'll want to have a signed cover letter expressly stating that you have the authority to apply for this grant. You'll want to include that scope of work template, using the template. the budget justification worksheet that we just looked at, and any supporting documentation. So that might include maps and photographs of the project site if that's appropriate. Maps should clearly identify the project area. This information might include permits if they've been issued, and you can include anything that you think sets your project apart or would support funding of the project. Do keep in mind, the reviewers are busy professionals. Only include enough detail to clearly convey your proposed project details. Keep the number of pages to a minimum. That's definitely going to help you in the long run. Once you have all of the supporting documentation, combine them into a single PDF. So the cover letter, the scope of work, the budget justification worksheet, and the supporting documentation. Name them appropriately using this convention. So you as the applicant, the organization applying, the project name, and you're gonna include that in the portal here. Excuse me, y'all. So complete the application worksheet. This is where you will provide summary level information about your project, identify a short descriptive title, the lead organization, and the primary point of contact who will be managing the project. Identify all appropriate partners on the project team, specify the total amount you're requesting from TBRF in the funding request, and document the required match here. The total amount you're providing is matched, whether it's cash, in kind, a land purchase, unrecovered indirect costs, etc. How long will your project take? So that project duration here. Project should not exceed a 3-year period. Include a brief summary of your project here in the abstract. This summary will be shared publicly to our board members and on the website, so keep that in mind. And clearly reference those specific CCMP actions or habitat master plan goals that your project will address here in the conservation objectives. If your project requires permits, describe which agency permits are needed and whether or not they've been submitted or approved. If they have already been issued, include a copy in the supporting documentation. Under supplemental information here, you could include the approach to monitoring and assessing progress on metrics listed above in the abstract and objectives sections. You could also include anything that you think sets your project above others. Is there a community engagement aspect? Will open science tools be used or developed? Will new partnerships or replicable models be created? And will this project implement a novel approach to conservation objectives? These are some examples that you could incorporate. But again, remember to keep it concise. Back to this portal, changes cannot be made to the application once it is submitted. So you're going to use that, the information that you put here in your application worksheet, you're going to copy and paste that into the application portal. Remember to input everything into one attachment, put it all together. You're going to convert your budget justification worksheet to a PDF, combine the cover letter, scope of work, budget worksheet, and supporting documentation, and name it with the appropriate convention, and submit that by March 15th at 5 p.m., which is 1 month from today. So that was a lot of information. My voice is dying, but hopefully it was helpful. We did have 3 questions that were submitted that have already been answered and published online. I'm going to go over these briefly first, but feel free to go ahead and put questions in the chat. Elsa's going to help us keep track of questions in the chat. Once we're done with these, we can also unmute if you would prefer to ask questions that way. So the first question here, a local government is planning to move forward with design, permitting, and construction for habitat restoration using funds stipulated in a legal settlement agreement. The plan is to get permits for more areas than they can implement for the settlement funding and seek additional funding in the future to expand the project. Is there an issue using the settlement funds as TBRF match? You should know that the RFP states that match must be voluntary in nature. So mitigation, restitution, or other permit or court ordered settlements are ineligible. Only the funds above and beyond those stipulated in the settlement agreement would be eligible to count as matching funds for TBRF. Can funds for presentation of results at conferences be included in the budget requests? No. The budget justification instructions specify that funding will not cover conference travel. Applicants are encouraged to present results to the TBEP Technical Advisory Committee or appropriate regional subcommittee. And last but not least, can the matching obligation be passed to stakeholders? Meaning, can future release of funds be conditional on a one-to-one match by individuals for whom restoration work is performed? Yes, although the match provided must be voluntary in nature. So stakeholders providing the matching contribution should be listed as project team partners. Okay, we did it in just about half an hour, so let's move on to questions from y'all.
One of the first questions, Jessica, is where the sample scope of work and sample budget are available, if those can be accessed.
Yes, they will. They're going to be included in the meeting materials. I'm not sure if I updated that link yet, so I will probably need to do that after this. But I believe I can also email attendees, so it will be provided to you in probably multiple ways.
And it looks like Maya's a step ahead of us and just provided a link for the webinar documents in the chat there.
Perfect.
So the next question is, are there any TBRF eligibility restrictions for regulatory required actions? TDML, BMAP related activities.
I'm gonna let either Maya or Elsa answer that. My understanding is no, but I don't want to mix it up. So Maya, if you don't mind answering that question.
So projects that are required by different regulatory programs are not eligible for TBRF funding. TBRF is meant to support projects that are going above and beyond those actions that are otherwise required. If you are doing voluntary approaches to improving water quality and you're not being required to by a regulatory agency such as the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, those sorts of activities would be eligible.
Awesome, thank you. See a few here.
And there's a question, are there any TBRF restrictions for projects located outside the Tampa Bay watershed?
Yes, so a TBRF funded project would have to provide a benefit to the Tampa Bay watershed. For instance, if an organization was outside of the watershed, but it was providing a benefit of some sort to the watershed, that would be okay. But if you're talking about a direct on the ground restoration project, that would have to be within the watershed. So hopefully that's clear. Juanita, let me know if it's not.
And I provided a link to that map once again, just so you have it handy. This is a match question. Is the matching requirement a certain percentage, as in 50%, 30%, etc.? And is matching both in kind and monetary?
Yep, match can be either in kind or cash, and there is a one-to-one requirement. So for your project total, that would be at least 50%. But obviously, more matches, great too.
Are project collaborations encouraged?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to see TBRF used as an opportunity to create those new collaborations, those new partnerships, or taking advantage of existing partnerships is great too. The whole point of this program is, as Maya said, is to go sort of above and beyond what's already being done. And if there's a way to do that with for instance, a private entity which can't apply for TBRF and a public entity which is interested in doing some good work together, that's a great opportunity to have some collaboration.
There's a question, what if the phases of the project are repeated during each of the 3 years? Any guidance on packaging that into a scope of work document?
So that it is okay to repeat repeat it in title, if that makes sense. So for instance, for a project where data collection is occurring, you could have year 1 of data collection as one phase and year 2 of data collection as a second phase. The measurable benefits would be the what's the word I'm looking for? Interim data set that's provided, and then the final data set. So yes, it is okay to repeat somewhat if it's needed, and if you can justify it with measurable benefits. So yes, that is possible.
I think William might want to unmute and explain his question more, but generally the way that question is written in there tells me that you're maybe struggling to structure a scope of work the way that we're looking for. And so if you want to explain your question a little bit further here, I'd encourage you to, or to reach out directly to Jessica, Elsa, or myself, and we can help you think about your project in a different way that's maybe a better fit for how we approach Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund projects.
All right, there's a question about determining whether a project benefits an underserved or disadvantaged community. Is there a tool that they can use? And it looks like a suggestion of the ejscreen.epa.gov mapper. Do we recommend that tool, or is there a better tool?
So EJ is.
Go ahead.
I was going to say EJ Screen is a sufficient tool. I think that would be appropriate to look at in our region. I just wanted folks to understand that we are also putting together an equity strategy. And so we will have our own mapping products that are available, not in time for this proposal, but just to be aware that that is work that's ongoing at the estuary program. We're also pretty broadly defining what an underserved and overburdened community looks like. And so, even if your community doesn't pop up on EJ Screen, that doesn't mean that you ought not make a case that the community that you're trying to serve is underserved or overburdened.
All right, and Jessica, do you want to describe what indirect or admin costs are allowed and not allowed?
So the budget instructions, I'm going to pull that up so you can view that. Maybe.
So I'll just offer that one does not need to submit to request indirect or overhead costs. If you do, they cannot exceed 10% of the overall request. The majority of the restrictions on what kinds of things are eligible for funding are not really related to indirect and admin costs. They are related to things like tuition, out-of-state travel, conferences, those sorts of things.
All right, hopefully that answers the question. And then just a note to make sure that you aren't, double counting costs. If you do include them in the indirect, don't also include those costs as a direct expense as well. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. All right, so Brian, if that answered that question, great. If not, feel free to follow up with a second question or come off mute. Are projects focused on community-based education on water quality correlated to saving wildlife ecosystems eligible? I'm making that connection with the CCMP. So projects on community-based education on water quality correlated to saving wildlife ecosystems. Would that be eligible? I don't know if that's enough information to answer the question, or if you need to follow up specifically with, it looks like Jen.
Yeah. I think that it is certainly possible that those would be eligible, but I'd encourage you to reach out to one of the three of us, and we can help make sure that you frame your proposal appropriately in the context of the CCMP.
And will these chat questions be added to the frequently asked questions on the website?
We can do that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's a way to capture these questions before we all log out of the webinar. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
And Jessica's put her email address there in the chat for follow-up questions. I believe we've gotten through all the questions in the chat so far. If I missed one, please either re-enter it or feel free to come off mute.
And I had a couple of private messages. Let me make sure. I think those have all been repeated in the main chat. If you did send me a message and we didn't answer it, let me know.
And William, yeah, you can feel free to come off mute if you'd like to ask more questions verbally about your specific. I believe it was about the phases in the work plan.
Yeah, sorry to perhaps burden everybody with something that's specific to me, but we were planning on doing our project in an iterative way, where we had outreach, help with some school kids doing some construction of some blocks that we're going to put out in the water, put them out, and then transplant them, and then repeat that over 3 different years. So we'll end up with a pretty good amount of restored shoreline, but built in. Well, we were thinking in annual phases. Now I'm not really sure how to package that for the scope of work without it being, 14 phases.
Well, Maya and Elsa, y'all should definitely correct me if this doesn't sound right, but if you're doing additional restoration each year, William, I think that those are additional measurable benefits. So if you're restoring 100 feet, or you're putting in 100 feet of oyster bed or whatever it is in one phase or in 1 year, and you're doing the same thing the next year, and eventually you're coming up with 300 feet of installed oyster bed, for instance, those would be additional measurable benefits that you can show and provide. So that seems like that would be fine to me. Does that make it any clearer, though? I want to make sure you get your question answered.
I hope so. I think so.
Okay,
I think I've got it.
cool. Awesome.
Are there any other questions? Now's your chance, everyone.
Yeah, you've got Maya here, who's been running this program for a while, me, who's trying to figure it out, Elsa, who knows this program in and out too. So if you have questions specific to your project or just general, feel free to throw it out there. We've still got a few more minutes.
Also open science questions. Marcus is here.
Marcus is here too, to convert you to the open science cult.
Hi everyone, this is Lindsay. I am from Clearwater Marine Aquarium in Clearwater. I have a sort of interesting habitat restoration question. One of the things we try and do is try and reduce the amount of artificial lighting that is viewable from our beaches to reduce the amount of hatchling and adult sea turtle disorientations we're seeing on our beaches. Would that be something that would a project related to that, might that be eligible for something like this?
One of the things I'm thinking of that may be a hurdle is typically TBRF is not used for funding on private property. So if it were, for instance, updating lighting on condos, I don't think that would be applicable, but Maya and Elsa should feel free to correct me if that's not the case. If it were public streetlights, for instance, or some other public-owned utility or public-run utility, that could potentially be applicable. Hopefully that is helpful.
I think it depends on the nature of the activities that you'd be proposing. So if you're talking about like an education, like behavior change campaign that has, you know, some certain like supplies and materials that you might give away to private property owners, that I think that could be appropriate. Things you might want to consider is making sure that you respond to a question that will come up about whether or not your work is only based on the beach side of the intercoastal, the Gulf side of the intercoastal, because the watershed actually, you know, kind of stops. And it's focused more on the intercoastal than it is on the Gulf side. We know that there's overlap between where those turtles go, and so I would just like make sure you have an answer for that type of question related to the watershed where the work would be going on, and then be really specific about those kinds of you know, what the financial request would be supporting, so that you have a response also to those private property kinds of questions.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much.
And Allison, I see your question in the chat. Can you tell me what SUP is? Because I'm assuming it's not stand-up paddleboard.
We can't hear you.
There you go.
Single-use plastic.
I see.
We're trying to get an ordinance passed in Tampa, and single-use plastic is one of the main things that goes into the river. So we're trying to reduce the use of single-use plastic and I just have this idea because we've been talking about setting up a way that people who don't have access to dishwashing and or people who might want to join a community. This is in other places. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's basically a place where people's dishes go. They get washed and then they would get returned versus using single-use plastic. So maybe working with one of the community outreach programs and actually employing people who need work to do that. That was my thought, and I don't know if that's something that you would deal with or it's out of your league.
I'm going to try to answer this, and Maya will probably correct me. But if you are working with one of those entities, a nonprofit or City of Tampa, for instance, that could be eligible from that regard, keep in mind that TBRF is limited to a 3-year project phase, so it could be potentially used, I guess, for getting the project going, but you would need to have a clear plan for what the maintenance looks like long term for a program like that.
Okay.
I think it would also, you'd have to factor in that it should be accessible to the public and not just to specific private businesses, for instance.
Right.
That's all that comes to my mind. But Maya and Elsa, do y'all have anything to add?
I'm also hoping that you're maybe talking about something like a community wash station for people experiencing homelessness. Is that what you're talking about, or have I written that in myself completely?
Well, that's a little bit different because that doesn't have anything to do with single use. Well, it sort of does have something to do with single use plastic, but I mean for them to wash their dishes, or I guess it would be to try and get less single use plastic in the community and help smaller businesses be able to do that. Not to replace single use with real dishes is the idea behind it. And then, so not really setting up places for people to wash off. So no, not that. But I was thinking, you know, some of the organizations help people who need work. So it could maybe be funded by an entity that and or the city that could support it to employ people who are underserved.
So I think that the project potentially passes the first test of, you know, we have priorities related to litter management and marine debris. And so I think it passes that first test of eligibility. I think Jessica's counsel is wise in terms of how ready this project is to, sort of move from concept to action. And I'd also suggest that the Tampa Bay Estuary Program currently has a grant project with the Gulf of Mexico program. It's a trash-free waters grant, where we've been documenting both hotspots and the types of litter and marine debris throughout the watershed. And so any project that you propose should be responsive to the data that's been collected through that effort. And once we actually have the litter management plan for Tampa Bay, this kind of project might be a little bit more timely.
Okay.
So my answer to you is yes, it probably passes the eligibility test. It doesn't sound like it's probably going to be the highest priority this year, but that's not a hard no. That's just me sort of telling you my read on how you might want to think about it. But I'd encourage you to keep developing the project for sure.
Okay, thanks.
I think Maya brings up a couple points that I may not have mentioned is we encourage you to submit any eligible proposal, even if it's not a priority, because we do have these other ways to fund projects that sometimes might be a more appropriate fit for a project that you submit. And also this funding opportunity comes around every year. So even if your proposal is not 100% ready this year, it may be beneficial for you to either submit a proposal or wait and submit a letter of intent to submit a proposal next year. Just getting it out there so we can begin that collaborative process is great too. And Allison, is that the Trash Free Waters program? I believe I can give you a link to the Trash Free Waters info on our website. I will look that up and add it. Any other questions, y'all, project specific or not?
I'll just put an offer out there to this group. I am not a reviewer of these grants. I don't make a recommendation about these grants, but I have seen all of them that have come through over the past 6 or 7 years. And so I would be very happy to review a draft scope of work or a draft budget if you put them together and provide my insights about ways that your proposal could be strengthened. I just ask, this is something that I'm volunteering to do, so give me as much time as you possibly can. Be gentle and with your expectations in terms of how fast I can turn it around, but I will do my best to provide that support if you choose to take me up on it.
Maya, would you mind putting your email in the chat? Thank you.
All right, any other questions or any questions that we may have missed in the chat?
Not in the chat, but hi, I'm Chris Katipis with USF Libraries. I had sort of a general question for, say, this is the first time I've sat in on one of these, and say we wanted, maybe, sorry, let me frame it as clearly as possible here. Do you have any suggestions for ways that people could be exposed to potential project partners for these sorts of things? Like within a month, it's hard to imagine how to put all this together, but maybe you have recommended routes for how to interact with people that you might work with on one of these proposals.
I don't know that we have any sort of workflow that would help with that, but I think if you have something in mind, you could reach out to myself, Maya, and Elsa, and we could provide some potential suggestions of community groups or entities that we know might be interested in that work. You could also look to the TBEP Technical Advisory Committee. That's made up of a whole bunch of people, both from private entities, from government agencies, researchers, and potentially pose an idea, float that with those individuals to see if anyone is interested. those are two things that come to mind to me, but if Elsa might have suggestions too, go for it.
Maybe looking at past TBRF successful applications to kind of see like what projects and what partners have worked on TBRF projects in the past. And I can provide a link to past projects.
So yeah, Chris, definitely reach out to me if nothing else, and we'll try to get you pointed in some helpful directions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a bunch, because we're sort of in a position here where I think we could be helpful to others, but it'd be hard to execute, a project entirely to ourselves.
Sure. Oh, Brian, it looks like Elsa got that link right as you posted your question. William, the final reports of past projects are available in the TBEP library. Some of them may be in the tech publications. You can search in our library to find any of those publications, but if you are interested in something specific and cannot find it, you're welcome to reach out and we'll help you get that info. Just a couple minutes left here, y'all. I want to make sure you've had a chance to ask any questions you might have. Yeah, thanks for coming, Chris. Appreciate it. Well, especially if there are any private entities or individuals who may not be part of the eligible applicant types, I encourage y'all to reach out too if there's something you're interested in. Maybe we can help you find a good partner for your project. As we mentioned, those partnerships are definitely a good thing for the TBRF proposals. But if there are no other questions, we will wrap it up now. And thank y'all so much for coming. Hopefully I didn't talk your ear off too badly or cough in your ear too much. Reach out with questions and we look forward to seeing your proposals. Thanks, everyone. And I'll figure out how to stop recording eventually.